This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and these are your top stories. The international community calls for calm in Somalia amid a growing rift between the country's president and prime minister. The World Health Organization warns about an impending tsunami of COVID cases driven by the Omicron and Delta variants. And leaders of Russia and the US set to hold talks, with Ukraine tensions high on the agenda. We start today's program in the Horn of Africa region, where international pressure is rising on Somalia's president and prime minister to end their political feud. Since Tuesday, security forces belonging to politicians allied to Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble have reportedly been camping near the presidential palace. Following that development, Molly Fee, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, held separate talks with Prime Minister Roble and President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. There are growing fears of armed clashes between their supporters. Meanwhile, the head of Somalia's army, Brigadier General Odoa Yusuf Rage, has continued to urge the military to stay away from the country's political developments. Well, let's bring you the very latest on the story. We go live to Mogadishu, where our correspondent Mohammed Kahir is standing by. Mohammed, there are fears that the differences between the Somali president and prime minister might escalate into fighting among their supporters. What's the latest on this, and what should we expect going forward?
Well, there was major concern among the population that the difference between the prime minister and the president could play out similar events which we witnessed in April, where forces loyal to the government and that of the opposition clashed in Mogadishu. But a warning by the Army Chief, General Odoa Rage, sent a strong message to those who are still with politicians and those who are planning to join them that this is not the right way, and there is a constitutional duty to not meddle and take part in the politicians, self-interest fighting in the leadership, but rather to focus on the national duties of maintaining peace and stability in the country, and especially in the fight against armed group Al-Shabaab. And that message was welcomed across the political spectrum, especially by the opposition, which said that this is the right message that people needed to hear, and they congratulated the Armed Forces Commander for that strong message. So, and as you said before, there is also a call, a strong warning from the international community to this top leadership, the Prime Minister and the President, that they need to focus on the elections right now and put their differences aside.
Well, thank you so much, Mohammed Kahir, joining us there live from Mogadishu. Now, staying with the story, the head of Somalia's army, Brigadier General Odoa Yusuf Rage, had this to say on the matter.
Somali armed forces cannot operate within their own groups and be part of self-interested parties that have selfish motives. We need to be united and not lose sight of our national duties that we took the oath for.
Right, let's turn to the latest now on the coronavirus pandemic. The head of the World Health Organization has expressed his concern that the Omicron and Delta variants of COVID-19 together could cause a tsunami of new infections.
This virus will continue to evolve and threaten our health system if we don't improve the collective response. Right now, Delta and Omicron are twin threats that are driving up cases to record numbers, which again is leading to spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. I'm highly concerned that Omicron, being more transmissible, circulating at the same time as Delta, is leading to a tsunami of cases.
Well, the WHO chief went on to accuse richer countries of exacerbating the pandemic by hoarding health tools like masks and vaccines. He also called for efforts to secure a 70% global vaccination rate by the middle of 2022, even as half of nations worldwide had missed the target to vaccinate 40% of their populations by the end of this year. Well, the world has hit a record number of COVID infections in a 7-day period, with over 935,000 cases detected on average each day. The United States and European countries have been reporting record daily cases over the past week. Latin America is also seeing new daily highs. CGTN's Gao Yuming has more.
European countries are seeing dramatic surges of new COVID infections. France recorded over 208,000 daily cases on Wednesday, the most of any European nation. Health Minister Olivier Véran described the situation as dizzying. Cases were mostly driven by the Delta variant, with Omicron yet to have an impact. But Véran said it's something that would eventually happen. The government is increasing pressure on unvaccinated people to get shots.
I say to those who are not vaccinated, there is really little chance that this time you can escape COVID-19. The virus is spreading too fast, and the people who are more likely to be infected, more likely to have a severe form of the disease, are those who are not vaccinated.
In Germany, over 40,000 new cases were registered on Wednesday. An Institute for Infectious Diseases said cases of the Omicron variant increased by over 2,600, or nearly 26% within a day. And German Health Minister Karl Lauterbach said the new cases there have been underreported, and the actual incidence rate of infections is about 2 or 3 times higher. He said the underreporting was due to fewer tests being performed at workplaces and doctors' practices, as well as only a few of those test results being submitted to authorities. He advised Germans to spend the New Year period very cautiously.
Please celebrate in very small groups and do not endanger each other, because the current reported incidence of cases underestimates the danger we are currently in.
Britain reported over 180,000 new cases on Wednesday, up by 50,000 from the previous highest figure recorded a day earlier. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson says New Year celebrations could go ahead in a cautious and sensible way due to a high uptake of booster vaccine shots.
The Omicron variant continues to cause real problems. You're seeing cases rising in hospitals, but it is obviously milder than the Delta variant. And we've done about 32.5, maybe more, million booster jabs now. And that is allowing us to go ahead with New Year in the cautious way that we are.
New infections in Portugal have also set a new daily record with over 26,000. In Latin America, Argentina reached a daily record of 42,000 infections. New cases in the U.S. have also soared to their highest level. The average number of daily infections hit 250,000 in the past 7 days. The Omicron variant is estimated to make up nearly 60% of infections since December the 25th. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says the Nord Stream 2 undersea gas pipeline is ready to start exports now that a second stretch of the pipeline has been filled. This would help calm a surge in European gas prices.
I'd like to congratulate Gazprom and your partners in Nord Stream 2 on the completion of work and the creation of this additional large trunk route, and that it is ready for work. And now it's all up to our partners and customers at Europe.
Now, Nord Stream 2 was completed this September but awaits regulatory approval from Germany and the European Union. The pipeline had been scheduled to be completed in 2019, but construction was suspended following the threat of U.S. sanctions by the Trump administration. Europe has seen natural gas prices hit record highs as economic recovery and robust energy demand has strained supplies. The launch of Nord Stream will reduce gas prices in Europe as well as in the Ukraine by increasing supplies. Now, the White House says U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin will speak later today. Their talks come amid the Ukraine border tensions. White House spokesperson Emily Horn says the two leaders will also discuss topics including upcoming security talks and a tense situation in Europe. She says Biden had spoken with leaders across Europe about Ukraine, while U.S. officials are in contact with NATO and the EU. Russia has alarmed the West with a military buildup on Ukraine's border over the past 2 months. But Moscow denies planning to attack Ukraine and says it has the right to move its troops on its own soil. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has expressed his satisfaction with China's diplomacy work throughout 2021. He made the comments during an interview with Chinese media outlets, including CGTN. He hailed 2021 as a historic year for both China and the rest of the world. He emphasized the benefits of China's diplomacy, noting how this has stabilized and deepened relations between China and other countries. He said China supports the international community's fight against COVID-19 and promotes the equal distribution of vaccines. Well, the Chinese State Councillor Wang Yi will embark on his customary visit to Africa at the beginning of every new year. In 2022, he's expected to visit Eritrea, Kenya and the Comores between January 4th to 7th. That's according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian. Well, that is where we leave it for this edition of The World Today. Coming up shortly, we'll bring you Events 2021, a special edition of Africa Live, looking back at the major news stories of the year. Thanks for watching and see you shortly.
Africa is ending yet another pivotal year. From moments of uncertainty to moments of triumph, moments of unrest, moments of rapid change in business, climate change, security and diplomacy, and coming back from the brink. All these and much more on Events 2021.
So this is it, I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown. As they do so,
there are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Africa Live. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. In today's program, we take a look back at the key events of 2021, from the continuing coronavirus pandemic to climate-related natural disasters, humanitarian crises and conflict. Africa saw it all. Even the world of business had its fair share of surprises in 2021. And for more on that, I'm joined by CGTN business anchor Ramanyang. Now, Rama, if there is one thing economists and business journalists certainly enjoy doing, it's doing this economic forecasting and making these informed predictions. But I imagine that 2021 certainly kept you on your toes.
It certainly did, Lindy. The year could essentially be summarized down to three main themes: a surge in public debt and debt restructuring that's taking place at a very glacial pace, a rise in poverty levels and income inequality, and societies up and down right across the continent struggling to repair the damage inflicted by the pandemic. Even as we wrap up 2021, there are three economies on the continent, including Ethiopia, that are going to lose quota-free, duty-free access to the world's largest economy from the 1st of January. Lindy?
Well, we look forward to hearing all about that a little later in today's program. And we'll also be hearing from some of our correspondents around the continent. They'll be sharing some highlights and updates from the regions they covered. In South Africa, we'll be speaking to Julie Shire. She'll be live with us from Cape Town. Tesem Akende joins us from Jos in Nigeria. And in Addis Ababa, we'll be speaking to CGTN's Girum Chala. We also invite you, to our viewers, to participate in today's program. Share your expectations for the year ahead by answering our question of the day. What are your hopes for 2022? Send in your answers using the contact details on your screen and stay in touch on social media. Our special edition of Africa Live starts now. Now, let's begin with a look at how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the continent. Vaccines continue to arrive in Africa and many countries have ramped up distribution. However, challenges remain, preventing several countries from hitting their inoculation targets. CGTN's Wokista Nyabwa starts us off with insights on how the continent is faring so far.
By 20th December, Africa had registered just over 9 million cases of COVID-19. Out of these, about 8.35 million patients recovered. To date, the continent has reported over 226,000 deaths caused by the pandemic, and vaccination coverage remains highly variable across the region. African countries have initiated vaccination programs which have administered a total of 264 million doses. But fully vaccinating 70% of Africans requires about 1.6 billion more doses. By mid-December, only 20 African countries had vaccinated at least 10% of their population, the global target the World Health Organization had set for September 2021. Only 6 countries have hit the year-end target of fully vaccinating 40% of their population, and only 2 countries, Mauritius and Seychelles, have reached the 70% coverage seen as essential for controlling the pandemic. At the current pace, the WHO estimates that it will take until May 2022 before Africa reaches 40% coverage and August 2024 before it reaches the 70% mark. China has pledged 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to African countries. This is in addition to the nearly 200 million doses that China has already supplied to the continent. The United States has also pledged 17 million doses of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine to the African Union. COVAX, the COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access Program led by the WHO and international partners, continues to receive and distribute vaccines to countries which need them. Kenya lifted its curfew in October, enabling many public spaces to operate freely once more. However, Rwanda has imposed a 10 p.m. curfew and suspended the popular mass sports and car-free days as the country grapples with a fresh wave of virus infections. Several Western countries that had previously announced travel bans against countries in southern Africa after the discovery of the Omicron variant have since dropped the travel restrictions.
The Omicron variant is fueling a rise in infections in South Africa. The country is one of the hardest hit on the continent, recording over 3 million cases and more than 90,000 deaths. Frontline health workers have perhaps borne the brunt of the pandemic, not just physically, but also psychologically. Julie Shire has been following that story in Cape Town and joins us now live. Julie, what's the latest?
That's right, Lindy. The country is seeing a sharp rise in new infections, a large proportion of which are Omicron cases, but hospitalizations remain stable for now. The problem is that healthcare workers not only have endured 2 extremely hard years, they're also getting infected by this highly transmissible variant. Omicron has the ability to reinfect people who have caught COVID-19 in previous waves, and this obviously makes their job extremely hard and puts tremendous strain on a already stretched health service. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. David Gonçalves in Johannesburg. Here's his story.
My name is David Gonçalves. I am a psychologist and I work in private medicine. COVID's taught me that there are lasts. We're so aware of the first time you meet people, your child's first steps, your first date. But you know, we forget about lasts. There's the last time you'll have a conversation with somebody. There's the last time you'll be able to share a meal with someone who's important in your life. At the peak of it, it was quite dramatic. A lot of the ICUs were full with people on ventilators. I would stay in touch with families of people who were ventilated, because in some instances the feedback was very, very difficult for them to hear. It was quite difficult for me to give at times. Very difficult to to watch people lose their significant others, especially more than once or twice a day. But also in a strange sense, it is good to feel like you can be with people when they needed somebody there. We'd never been faced with a pandemic like this, so there was a lot of uncertainty, and it just became a question of trying to do the best with what we had. It's what I imagine wartime medicine is like. Working in the medical field is fairly tiring anyway under normal circumstances, but when you throw a pandemic on top of that, it is quite exhausting. It's not just a question of running around ticking lists, it's people's lives that you're dealing with. Even though you work in a medical setting, you're also a parent and a spouse and things like that, so your normal life gets disrupted. Now with Omicron, you know, we can see that this wave is really peaking around our traditional rest time. The hint is that perhaps hospitalization will be a bit less, but this Omicron is so incredibly transmissible that those numbers could just balloon so high that there will be high rates of hospitalizations. So the biggest lesson for me is spend time with the people who matter in your life. And we better enjoy and appreciate the moments we have, because you never know when your last is coming.
International cooperation has helped many African countries, and China ties have also helped Egypt. When the new coronavirus broke out in Egypt, China supported the African country with medical supplies. And as Egypt struggled with the first wave of the pandemic, China offered the country, Egypt, all the supplies that they needed, and in this they gave protective gear and vaccines. And the jewel of these healthcare ties has been the production of COVID-19 vaccines domestically made in Egypt using Chinese patents and technologies. Here's CGTN Adel Al-Marouki with more details.
If it weren't for China, Egypt wouldn't have been able to efficiently contain the new coronavirus infections in the North African nation. China's donations of tons of much-needed medical supplies helped Egypt fight the first wave of the pandemic. The year 2021 saw the strengthening of the partnership between the two nations after China helped Egypt to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines domestically through the government's vaccination arm Vaccera.
We have benefited from the Chinese experts' knowledge. I was part of the group who met the Chinese delegation in Vaccera. They worked with us on quality control measures during the packaging, which is very important for having an effective vaccine. We've also learned from China the containment measures.
China was the first nation to deliver millions of COVID-19 vaccines to Egypt at a time when countries were competing to get vaccines. Vaccera's partnership with the Chinese pharmaceutical giant Sinovac ended Egypt's struggles to secure vaccine supplies for its domestic inoculation program.
The agreement with the Chinese party that we had two different phases for the technology transfer. The first one is the filling process, and we successfully succeed. And as I mentioned, that we produce about 25 million doses. The second phase is gonna to produce from scratch. So it's the produce of the raw material here in Egypt. We start and we expect by the mid of next year we are gonna to produce the bulk itself. And it will be for us a big opportunity.
What we hope for is a transfer of the technology to produce the raw material, starting with isolating the strain of the virus to growing the virus on tissue and then collecting the virus and inactivating it. All this process takes place before packaging, and it is what we are working with Sinovac to achieve.
The speed of progress in vaccine cooperation between Egypt and China has been remarkable. In less than 3 months after the two countries signed their domestic vaccine production agreement in April 2021, Vaccera's production line in Egypt churned out its first batch of jointly produced vaccines. The success of the Egyptian partnership with Sinovac opened more doors for Chinese vaccine cooperation with countries in the region. Few months after Egypt's domestic production line began operation, countries like Algeria and Morocco followed suit. Egypt now has bigger dreams with its new vaccination facility. It wants to become a regional hub with a capacity to produce 1 billion doses annually. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
That's all from me here in Cape Town. Back to you, Lindy.
Thank you so much, Julie Shire, live for us there in Cape Town, South Africa. Now, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic on the African continent has improved in terms of vaccinations. However, more needs to be done. That's according to Elaine Poi, the team lead for the Immunizations, Vaccines and Emergencies Program at the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa. Despite the supply of vaccines going up, there remains a deficit. Let's take a listen.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on this program. Now, we know that vaccination in Africa took off to a slow start. So how can the continent improve its vaccination rates this coming year?
What we believe for our continent to improve the coverage, we need to look at two ways. The first one is to see how to improve vaccine delivery and service availability. We have countries such as DRC or Chad, where almost half of the districts have not started vaccinating. The second side of it is to improve communication. Infodemics is one of the biggest challenges we are facing in the continent, and to have adequate and tailored approach to fight infodemic will really help the continent to improve the coverage.
Access to vaccines remains one of the biggest challenges facing the continent when it comes to the fight against COVID-19. So what can Africa do to boost its manufacturing capacity going forward?
It's true that having the capacity to have our own vaccines manufactured in Africa is very good. And that's why we believe that as Africans, we need to improve our capacity to dialogue and negotiate with manufacturers so that we can have the transfer of capacity and knowledge so that countries such as South Africa, Senegal, Rwanda, Egypt, or Kenya, who have really the capacity to manufacture vaccine, can do so. And we believe that with the support from the African Union and our partners, Africa can get there.
There are many lessons learned so far since the pandemic first hit the world in 2020. So what can we expect in 2022?
Yes, we really learned a lot with this pandemic. We started without knowing which vaccine a given country will receive. Countries were planning without knowing when and which quantity of vaccine will come. We also learned that having a strong health system was important for adequate reaction, but also having adequate planning, not only planning from national level, but also planning with the communities, knowing where people are located and which strategy to implement to reach them was critical. So for next year, what we really expect improved supply, not only in terms of having countries to choose which vaccine they want, but also which quantity and when this is expected. This is critical for countries to be able to plan adequately. The second one is we'll be able for sure this time, with the number of people already vaccinated, to have less resistance in terms of infodemics.
You are watching a special edition of Africa Live. Time now for a short break, and when we return, we take a look back at Africa's security challenges this year. Welcome back. Now, several countries in Africa experienced conflicts and various forms of political turmoil this year. This includes insurgencies, coups, civil wars, and widespread protests. The instability significantly affected the lives of ordinary citizens, with millions being displaced from their homes. Let's take a closer look now at instability, specifically in Nigeria and Ethiopia. Tese Makende joins us live from Jos for more on the ongoing insurgency in Nigeria's north. And from Addis Ababa, we're joined by Girum Chala. He'll be giving us an overview of the Ethiopian government's battle against Tigrayan rebels. Now, let's start with Tesem. Tell us, Tesem, what successes has Nigeria recorded in the fight against the Boko Haram insurgency in the north of the country this year?
Indeed, so much successes, and I'm quoting the president of the country now, President Muhammadu Buhari, who only last week said the authorities or its armed forces are at the verge of, are the last phase of crushing out insurgents from the country. So, quoting the president, a lot of successes recorded. Earlier in October, it took delivery of its last, 6 aircraft, talking about Super Tucano aircraft, who are supposed to be a game changer in the fight against insurgency here in Nigeria. Earlier in July as well, it took a receipt of 6 others, making 12 of them in all. There's been so much, successes. The armed forces say a lot of, the insurgents have surrendered to superior firepower from troops of the Nigerian armed forces. And that's at the federal level. Down at the state government level, the governor of Borno State, which is the epicenter of insurgency in Nigeria, says so much successes have been recorded such that, all the IDP camps, the camps, housing internally displaced people will be shut down by the end of the year, which is just about 2 days from now. So a lot of, successes recorded. quoting the federal authorities and the state authorities down in Borno State, which has been the hottest bed of insurgency in the country.
Thanks, Tessem. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Jerome, coming to you now. It's been over a year since fighting broke out in Ethiopia between government forces and Tigrayan rebels. What is the status of the war right now?
Lindy, for the first time in about 12 months plus, this is the time that we can say war is subsiding in most of the northern regions of Ethiopia. Amhara, Afar, and Tigray region are slightly returning to normalcy, and this is a very good news for people who are residing here. The government, as you know, has been waging war against TPLF force after TPLF leading forces there went rogue against the constitutional order of the country. Since then, civil war broke out. Many people have been evicted from their homes. Thousands, hundreds of thousands are now in the hands of humanitarian aid. But then again, the good news now, as I said earlier, is war is subsiding. After after the government decided not to enter the Tigray region, I said that has even been concretized. Many people are waiting for a peaceful beginning this time around. The government is proposing an all-inclusive dialogue to happen in this country, and we're expecting that to happen as soon as possible. So in general terms, we can report to you that war is subsiding in the northern part of Ethiopia. The national dialogue is now going to be staged in a few months or less time. And this is a good news, but the humanitarian situation in the north needs attention at this time around.
Jerome, thank you so much. Tessem, coming back to you, you mentioned a little there when we previously spoke to you about displacement of millions of people that have been displaced by violence. What has life been like for them, and what kind of humanitarian support have they been receiving?
Indeed, life hasn't been very, very easy for them at all. Over 2 million of them displaced, and many of them, well, most of them used to be farmers. And so being displaced from their ancestral homes, to IDP camps, life hasn't been easy, but they've been surviving, and there's been a lot of support from humanitarian agencies, from support from well-spirited individuals as well, from faith-based organizations, all coming, with aids to them in terms of food, in terms of clothing, and so more. The festive season here in Nigeria has had a lot of non-governmental organizations and, of course, well-spirited individuals visiting these camps in Borno State, in the FCT, in Abuja, and of course here in Jos and other states where these internally displaced people are. So it's been not the best of times for them. Of course, home is always home. And so they are now, most of them are in IDP camps. Of course, beyond being in IDP camps, there are also those who are, in homes of well-spirited people who have taken them and given them refuge and shelter and all of that. But honestly, it's not been the best of times. But of course, they've been coping. And so they look forward to the time they will actually, the insurgency will end so they can return back to their homes and live their lives normally. The government of Borno State, the governor precisely, was with the president in Abuja in October, where he said houses have been built and there are efforts ongoing to ensure that before the year rounds up, all the IDP camps in the state will be shut so that these people can reunite, get back to their ancestral lands. Of course, he said the security situation has improved so much that these people can, get back to their homes. Here in Jos, one of them, I interacted with one of them, a lady precisely, who has also been a victim of violence, and she told me her story of how much they long to get home someday. And here is a story you can watch.
My name is Rebecca Monday. I am 48 years old. Our community was invaded by armed men in 2017. They burned our houses and killed some people. We had to leave the area for safety. Farming used to be our mainstay, but our land have been taken over. I have 4 children. They are all now out of school because we can't afford to pay for their education. My story is just one of several other victims of communal violence in Jos, north central Nigeria. A traditional ruler of another community gave us shelter and food. He has really done well over the years, but I bet to say that he is now overstretched. We are quite a lot, and most of us, especially the women, don't have any gainful employment. Hunger is our biggest challenge. I've not had breakfast today, and it's almost noon now. We feel neglected, especially by the government, because we've had just little support from the authorities since we came here. I want the government to secure our village and other areas that have witnessed attacks. Rebuilding our falling walls will be a big challenge, but we are ready to go and start all over. At least we will return to our farms, and feeding won't be a problem anymore. I remain grateful for all that has been done for us here, especially the shelter. But truth be told, there is no place like home. I look forward to that day when we will return to our village and live in peace.
Well, it certainly shows the consequences of conflict in Africa. Thank you so much to Tesem Akende, live with us from Jos, and Girum Chala with us from Addis Ababa. Now, it has been a mixed bag for African economies this past year. Ramanyang joins me up next for a deeper look at that. Let's take a short break.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, welcome back to this special edition of Africa Live, where we're recapping the key events of 2021. Now, remember to keep sending your answers to the question of the day. What are your hopes for 2022? Send your thoughts to us using the contact details on your screen. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just a health crisis. It also strained government budgets to breaking point, sent tens of millions deeper into extreme poverty, while setting back progress in expanding employment and reducing income inequality. For more on this, let's now turn to CGTN Africa business anchor Ramanyang. Rama, what would you say were some of the biggest business stories of 2021?
Well, arguably, Lindy, the surge of money into the fintech space is one of the big ones that we saw. More and more governments nudging their citizens towards using more digital transactions and a lot less cash. And we'll have a bit more on that a little later on. But the big stories come down to three main themes: innovation, unemployment, and debt. Now, given the wave of pandemic restrictions that many countries implemented, unemployment surged in many regions. Kenya, for example, where we are, had nearly 1.3 million unemployed persons by the end of March. Debt is also a key part of this story. From May 2020 to date, 40 countries around the world are estimated to have saved about $10 billion. But the debt service suspension initiative ends on the 31st of December. And the G20 Common Framework for Restructuring Public Debt has yet to really take off. In fact, as a managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, put it, we may see economic collapse in some economies unless urgent action is taken, Lindy.
Well, Rama, of course, the pandemic continued to impact businesses and economies, but in somewhat different ways. Tell us more about this.
That it certainly did. And the numbers do make for some pretty grim reading right across the continent. The pandemic has claimed over 226,000 lives across Africa. Nearly 8.5 million people, however, have recovered, according to data from the Africa CDC. However, the damage we're talking about here is a bit more widespread than that. Take a look. Let's start with the big picture. Now, to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly disrupted jobs, business operations and economies would be a huge understatement. Across most of sub-Saharan Africa, where spending on public healthcare has been problematic for decades, really, being sick can often be a catastrophic financial event. And that leads us to our first number. Roughly 500 million people around the world, a big part of those right here in Africa, driven into extreme poverty due to having to pay for their healthcare costs out of their own pockets. Catastrophic spending in this case is being defined as spending over 25% of the household budget just on healthcare.
Now, because more households either did not seek care or the cost of doing so was prohibitive, we ended up seeing a spike in the number of deaths attributable to diseases that we had already beaten, like tuberculosis and malaria. And at the same time, immunization coverage in other diseases declined. The cost of that may essentially show up years to come. Cost is a huge barrier in getting access to healthcare, and it gets worse the poorer you are. World Bank data collected between April and August last year indicated that for lower middle income households, cost was a reason to not seek health services when they really needed it 30.6% of the time. That's roughly the same proportion as those who didn't seek healthcare because of COVID. But for low income households, cost was an issue 2/3 of the time. And that starts to make sense when you look at the economic context in which all of this is happening. If you include those who are unemployed and are not looking for work, the unemployment rate in South Africa hit 44%. Nigeria's unemployment rate was over 33% by the end of 2020, and it had quadrupled in the last 5 years. 30 million people were pushed into extreme poverty by this pandemic, according to IMF data, and at the same time, income inequality has gotten a lot worse. Take South Africa, for example. Low-wage workers had 4 times the job losses of high-wage ones, and the gap in earnings between men and women went from 29% to 43%. Despite all of this, there is a bright spot. Despite all the economic dislocation that I've just been pointing to, 2021 was also a record year for venture capital being invested across the continent. The figure for just the first 9 months of the year was $2.7 billion, and that beats the 2019 full year figure of just over $2 billion. That is 2021 by some of the key numbers.
And I should certainly point out that a big chunk of that $2.7 billion actually did go into the financial sector. So what lies ahead in 2022? Well, IMF is forecasting growth of 3.7% this year, 3.8% next year. But yes, that is a welcome expansion, especially after the steep contraction that we've seen in 2020. But to quote the fund, that is still the slowest recovery relative to other parts of the world. Well, this special edition of Africa Live does continue. We'll be focusing on diplomacy when we return. Lindy will be back shortly.
Join us as we travel the world welcoming the new year, highlighting the ceremonies and festivals of cultures across the globe. The year starts fresh with optimism, hope, and wishes for a brighter future. From bells and horns to grand fireworks to the quiet chime of a toast, every hour will showcase a new year beginning and what it means in that part of our diverse world. It's a New Year celebration right here on CGTN.
Welcome back. 2021 was a good year for diplomacy and cooperation between China and Africa. Apart from the joint efforts to combat COVID-19, African countries and China took part in several events that further strengthened their relationship. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a look back at the year that was in cooperation.
2021 began with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's traditional first overseas tour of the year to Africa. The foreign minister visited Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Botswana, Tanzania, and the Seychelles. On the agenda were the implementation of the outcomes of the 2018 FOCAC Beijing Summit, support for African countries against COVID-19 and economic recovery, as well as advancing the Belt and Road cooperation.
Strengthening cooperation with African countries.
On May 25th, during a reception held in Beijing commemorating the 58th Africa Day, Wang Yi addressed African envoys, stressing China's diplomacy to strengthen solidarity and cooperation with African countries. In September, the second China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo opened in Changsha, the capital of central China's Hunan province. The event attracted a record 900 enterprises from about 40 African countries and China. At the beginning of November, the fourth edition of the China International Import Expo opened in Shanghai. About 3,000 offline exhibitors from 127 countries took part, while for the first time there was an online exhibition. The expo attracted a large number of visitors from Africa and showcased quality African products. On November 26th, China's State Council Information Office released its first ever white paper detailing China's cooperation with Africa in a new era. It focused on reinforcing the relationship, promoting mutually beneficial cooperation, and safeguarding common interests. The 8th Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Ministerial Conference was held in Dakar, Senegal, between the 29th and 30th of November. In a live video address from Beijing during the opening ceremony, Chinese President Xi Jinping pledged 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Africa. The conference adopted 9 programs to strengthen cooperation between China and Africa. Among them, a pledge to boost Chinese imports of African products and Chinese assistance in poverty reduction programs in Africa. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
For more on this, let's bring in Professor Peter Kagwanja, the President and CEO of the Africa Policy Institute. Welcome to the show, Professor. Tell us, what aspects of China's relations with Africa really stood out for you in 2021?
Well, 2021 was significant in that it was the year we celebrated 20 years since the founding of FOCAC. And the FOCAC summit took place in Dakar, Senegal, which was very, very significant. Obviously, relations between China and Africa deepened in a very, very significant way. The other thing is China's intervention in Africa by way of solidarity against COVID-19, donating a huge amount of vaccines to the African continent in order to ensure that everybody is vaccinated against the pandemic. So those were 2 major developments this year compared to China-Africa.
And of course, you mentioned the solidarity that China showed Africa over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that really being significant over the past 2 years. But how do you think this support will evolve in 2022, considering Africa still suffers from weak vaccine manufacturing capacity?
The rest of the world seems to be taking, a very normal approach to this. The concept of solidarity is not universally applied, particularly to countries that are emerging, developing countries, like mainly in Africa. So we've seen solidarity within the COVAC, and China is also a major player in that global arrangement to ensure that the vast bulk of the population in the South is vaccinated. This is where China is coming in, and as promised last year, enables Africa to begin manufacturing vaccines within the continent, the support of Chinese technology and Chinese companies and people. And that, I think, is going to be the trend next year.
Now, Professor, some African countries experienced political turbulence in 2021, including military coups. Tell us, how can China's policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of African countries, in fact, help stabilize or even promote economic development in Africa?
Well, China cannot ignore instability and insecurity in Africa. Obviously, we have seen a lot of turbulence on the continent, coups, civil wars in countries, and China pursues policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. But behind the curtains, China is doing immense work in terms of trying to find solutions to some of these problems, working with partners in Africa through the people-to-people kind of cooperation, and basically looking for lasting solutions for some of Africa's festering conflicts.
Welcome back. Now, 2022 is also expected to be another pivotal year for the continent. Here's a look at some of the key events slated for the year. Well, it's certainly going to be a very busy and eventful 2022. And we can certainly hope that it is one where we can retain a sense of cautious optimism when it comes to the pandemic and many other challenges that the continent might face. Rama, what are your hopes? What are you looking forward to in 2022?
Well, it boils down to fairly specific things. Hopefully we can have expanded access to vaccines right across the continent, because that is the one key thing that we do need in order to essentially roll back the damage that COVID is inflicting up and down the continent on economies that we have here. Specifically when it comes down to things like income inequality, unemployment, I really do hope that we also will be able to make serious progress in solving that particular problem. If you look at countries like South Africa, for example, if you take the number of people who are unemployed and the number of people who've stopped looking for work, the unemployment rate comes around 44%. That's a really high number. And it's not just South Africa that's struggling with that problem. Pretty much in any economy you look at right across sub-Saharan Africa, it's the exact same thing. So hopefully 2022 will be the year when we finally get a handle on our unemployment problem.
Absolutely. And one has to wonder, what is the key element when it comes to economic recovery in Africa?
Yeah, that's all for me, Lindy. Back to you.
Well, thank you so much. It is where we leave it in this special edition of Africa Live. Thank you for staying with us. And remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen, and do follow us on our digital media platforms. Now, before you go, we do leave you with some photos of some of the most dramatic moments of 2021 across the continent. Thanks for joining us, and do stay safe.